welcome to Good Grief, a podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki, I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio, and today we are going to talk about the stages of grief. This is a hot one, ladies and gentlemen. This was one of the first ideas I had for an episode, and I just hadn't had the gumption to do this until today. So yeah, we're going to talk about the stages of grief and the ever well-known Elisabeth Kubler-Ross. Exciting, isn't it? I feel like most of you have heard this, even if you don't know who Elisabeth Kubler-Ross is. Most of you understand or have heard of the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I think we're all familiar with those. We've maybe seen a lot of memes or jokes or, silly things on sitcoms about going through the stages of grief. If you have not, or you are just curious, these stages of grief were first brought out in a book written by Elisabeth Kubler-Ross called On Death and Dying. They came out in 1969, where she focused on, this was more of a patient-focused death adjustment pattern, and she went into the 5 stages of grief. The ones I just mentioned: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So there's a whole lot of stuff out there on this, and 99% of it is incorrect and misconceptions. So let's talk about that for a second. The biggest misconception with the stages of grief written by Kubler-Ross are that these are the stages of grief, and they are in that order. And when there's a grief, you go through one, and then you go through the other, and the other, and the other, and then you're done. I think, first of all, if you've been listening to my podcast at all, you will know you don't get over your grief, do you? It's there. You just learn to live with it. You learn to walk with it. It's there forever. You don't get over it. That's not how this works, ladies and gentlemen. Now, there's a lot of people out there who since have touted her as, I don't want to say a heretic, but, they're saying, oh, there's no way any of this crap is true because we all know we don't get over grief. And what was she thinking? Blah, 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 blah. Well, first of all, if you have read the book, then you would know she specifically stated, that, these are just ideas of what happens. These are parts of grief. These are experiences of grief. These aren't like the checklist of grief, okay? But there have been some other criticisms of the stages of grief. There was a overview from McGill University, a very interesting article, I'll link it in the description, called "It's Time to Let the 5 Stages of Grief Die," which feels a little aggressive, but there was a lot of criticism with that. And one of the biggest arguments was that Kubler-Ross saw a whole lot of patients, gathered a lot of data, mostly anecdotal, and used those to create a scientific model that is not based on, quote, good evidence. So, okay. I don't think she specifically said at any point in her book. You can kind of see where I'm a little biased, so I apologize. But you can see in her book she never specifically says that this is scientific data. This is, her theories based on what she had seen and, of working with the dying, working with people who were dying and or other patients experiencing grief. But the whole framework on which her studies were built was just kind of torn apart in this. And it's a rather interesting read. But the biggest issue they had with this, and this is my issue too with this, how people are misconstruing what she was saying with this. It becomes kind of like a trap and a checklist that should not exist of here's what you have to do and when you have to do it, and then you'll get over your grief. And this can make people who either don't experience all of these, experience none of them, or experience them in different orders feel like they're not normal and that they're grieving wrong, and you can't relate to any of this. So, that was the biggest criticism in that article. But that even said, like, if you put that aside and you put aside that, how people have been misconstruing this for decades now, it is a fact that she based these models on her own anecdotal evidence and her experience with patients. specifically patients who were terminal, had a terminal diagnosis, and conversations with them. So again, it's not based on any kind of empirical, systematic, peer-reviewed investigations, but she never really claimed that. So it is a valid argument, but also kind of a non-argument, I guess. And from this and other things I've read, it seems like it's the only real argument against this. It's that either you completely misunderstood what she was saying about these, or, she didn't base this on the correct type of evidence to create a hypothesis. The other kind of issue with this is it seems to be misconstrued as this is like all grief. And when she wrote this book, she had been dealing with people who were facing their own mortality, their own death. And that's kind of what these models were set up for, were for people who receive a terminal diagnosis or find out they are going to die, and not necessarily for survivors, the people left behind that may have experienced a loss. And over the decades, this has just been one of those like things that gets spread out all over the place and has been applied to all forms of grief. But it can, these quote, I hate using the word stages because, there's these aren't check boxes. They're not really stages. They're just feelings and emotions you might experience. I would call them more experiences than anything else. These can be applied to all sorts of grief and loss. And if nothing else, these stages, experiences, whatever you'd like to call them, are a good reminder that part of our humanity is grief and loss, and that we're all going to experience things collectively. We're going to experience things on our own. Sometimes we might all experience things the same, and sometimes we won't. But there are some commonalities. There are some feelings that almost everybody grieving will feel or have felt. There's no specific checklist. There's no great model that you need to follow. There's nothing you need to live up to, and there's no right way to grieve. So if you're grieving now, please know you don't have to feel these things. And if you don't feel any of these things, that's okay. It's totally normal. So let's take a quick peek at the, quote unquote 5 stages. I still hate using that term, but let's take a look at the 5 stages. So the first one is denial, and I feel like that's one of those things we can all say maybe we have felt or at least understand, especially if it's a loss that's sudden or unexpected. Like, no, this didn't happen. This didn't happen. There's no way. This could not have happened. It's hard to just look it in the face and say, wow, that just happened. Sometimes it's hard to do that, and it's just easier to kind of protect ourselves and say, nope, this isn't real. This didn't happen. But that's completely understandable, especially in, your early parts of grief. But if you feel denial a year down the road, I still have losses. I sit back and say, there's no way this happened. This didn't happen. This couldn't have happened. Right? The second one is anger. I have talked about that in other episodes as well. Anger is a perfectly normal response to grief. And for some people, that's the first response. I feel like it kind of goes in with denial a little bit, like just being angry that something happened. Of course you're angry. Something huge just was removed from your life, possibly suddenly or tragically. So yeah, you're going to be angry. I've been angry very much. I still, years later, face anger with the death of my brother for a lot of reasons. I feel like, some of the circumstances around his death could have been prevented. Anger with myself that maybe I could have done something different. And we've talked about that before. That's part of guilt. You can't blame yourself for somebody else's death, obviously. But of course I have some of that. And I'm a little angry that as my parents are aging and, will eventually pass on, I have to deal with all this by myself. I have other family. I have my husband, but, everything was supposed to be taken care of by him and I together, and he's gone. So it's all on my shoulders. So sure, I feel some anger about that. The third stage, bargaining. So, okay, there's got to be a way out of this. All right. And I feel like this is a little bit lesser known one or lesser felt one. I never felt this. I never felt like, all right, look, I'll be a better person if you just bring my brother back. But some people do feel that. And if you felt that, that's obviously normal. Don't feel bad about having dealt with that. But I feel like this is This might be a little more common with disenfranchised grief or other non-death losses, like loss of a job. Like, all right, look, okay, I'll, work longer hours. I'll do better work. Just please don't fire me, or, things like that. Or loss of a relationship. Please take me back. I'll be a better partner, things like that. But even once something's already gone, like, God, take me, bring him back. We all know that's not going to happen. Things like that. But that's a very valid response, especially, and again, these were geared more towards people who are dying, not for griefs or losses that have already occurred. Okay, I've got this terminal diagnosis. I'll do anything. Just please take it away. I'll be a better person. I'll go to church every Sunday. I feel like that's a common one, but maybe not as common as some of the others. The fourth stage, depression. Once it all sinks in, you kind of lose your sense of hope and optimism, and you are now very depressed. I think depression and sadness is probably the number one emotion people experience when it comes to grief and loss, right? You're going to be sad. Of course you're going to be sad. Good Lord. I feel like anger and depression, and these are just my thoughts. I'm not reading any scientific research on what emotions are felt and not felt, but I just kind of get the feeling that depression and anger are the top two. So, and see, those are even not in the right order of these stages. I'm making air quotes since you can't see me, of grief. But yeah, this complete and utter feeling of hopelessness and withdrawal from life and others and the things you've enjoyed. And then the last one is acceptance, just letting it go, accepting this is happening, this has happened, here we are, And again, these don't need to be felt in that order, and she never specified that, by the way, that they need to be dealt with in this order. This is just the order she put them in. The order of where it might make the most sense. And maybe in the people she spoke with, this was the most common order of these feelings that people had, right? And it seems to make sense that acceptance might be at the end. But that's not necessarily true. You might hear of a loss that you were expecting. Somebody who's been sick for a very long time, and you've kind of accepted it even before they were gone because you've had time to process it while they were dying. But acceptance can come sooner. You don't have to go through everything else. You don't have to go through any of that. You can accept it and start moving forward immediately. That's fine too. So all these things I just went through, again, these are not to be taken as gospel, right? These aren't to be taken as this is the stages, this is the order, this is what you feel, don't feel anything else. And this also is based off of people who were facing their own imminent death, not necessarily those who are grieving the death of someone else or the loss of something else. And that's been, so I've clearly shown my bias by this point. It's just frustrating to me to watch somebody who had done such great research and, maybe not perfect research, but somebody who, pardon my French, gave a shit enough to do all this work and to write this book to help other people. And her name is continually dragged through the mud as somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, and it just bothers me because, she worked really hard on this book. And my cat is sniffing the microphone, so excuse me if you hear him. But, this wasn't perfect scientific research, and she never touted it to be such. And her name has just been continually dragged through the mud for decades. And I don't like that. She had a heart and the time and effort and care to work with all these people and to gather this information and to write an entire book about it. And now people are crapping all over her for this. And it's not like she was out there spouting hate speech or, poo-pooing anybody else's research. This was hers, and she spent a lot of time and effort on this and cared enough to even put this together in the first place to hopefully help somebody else, right? Like, why am I doing this podcast? I don't have a ton of followers. I'm not making any money off of this. I'm doing it because I care and because I want to make people out there who are grieving feel a little better about what they're feeling and feel a little less alone. And, maybe that's what she wanted too. Right, Ari? Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I will get down off my soapbox again. It just angers me so much that people have been so crappy about her, you know? And there's even a quote, and I'll read this quote by Elisabeth Kubler-Ross. She said this: "The reality is you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal. You will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same, nor should you be the same, nor should you want to." Okay. That's all. So a year after Kubler-Ross died in 2004, there was a new book released called On Grief and Grieving, co-authored by David Kessler, who's kind of well known in the grief community with a lot of the things he's written. And he's kind of one of those champions of Kubler-Ross, and he even said, quote, "These were never meant to help tuck messy emotions into neat packages, and that there is not a typical response to loss. There is no typical loss." So he wrote a book on grief and grieving that was released a year after Kubler-Ross passed on, and kind of took what she did and expanded upon it. So I would recommend, if you ever read Kubler-Ross's book, read his directly after or directly before. Read them in tandem, because he kind of helps more explain what she was going for. Okay. So that's about all I have on this matter. Again, I kind of let my bias show, and if you disagree with me, that's perfectly okay. I feel like there's a ton of literature out there, and having studied this for the amount of time I have so far, there is a ton of literature out there, and everything is a little different, right? I've said it a million times, grief is your own, you're not going to experience grief the same way the person next to you does. So there can be 8 million books out there from 8 million different points of view. So I would say if you read any literature on grief, loss, dying, death, don't always take it at face value. Read it with your own interpretation to it, and don't take it as gospel. There is no right way to grieve, people. There's no right way to do this. I promise. Whatever you're feeling. What do I say at the end of every episode? Your grief is yours. Your feelings are valid, right? Your grief is yours. And if that's what you're feeling, that's what you're feeling, and it's your grief. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you're wrong. Okay. Hop down off my soapbox and reach for my death deck. All right. Shuffle these up. Grab one out of the middle. Ooh, okay. Here's an interesting one. Do you believe mediums communicate with the dead? And this one's multiple choice, or you can just answer it from there. A, yes, I've heard about or experienced some amazing insights from a medium. B, I'm not sure, but at least it's good for some entertainment value. Or C, no, they deliver nothing but fictitious news. I don't know how to answer this, you guys. There are a lot of terrible humans out there who pose as mediums, who swindle people out of their money, and they play upon their grief and their hurt for their own monetary gain. I will say that, and I think we all know that. I do believe there are some people out there that believe, really strongly, truly, honestly do believe that they hear from the dead. I'm not going to say if they really do or not, because I don't know. I can't say. I'm not in their head. I'm not in their life. So I can't say. I will honestly say I don't know. I don't know that spirituality, mediums, whatever, are legit or not. I don't know. And I don't think I'm supposed to know, or I would know. That's kind of a cop-out answer, isn't it? But that's just all I'll say is I don't know, guys. And that's that. And you know what? If you do believe that, great. Maybe there's a bit of a placebo effect to it. And my theory on placebos is if it helps, great. Go for it. Maybe you're taking a sugar pill, but your pain went away. Great. Keep taking that sugar pill. If it's providing comfort, then it's doing what it's supposed to do. Okay? So if seeing a medium and having them, speak to your dead loved ones for you or hear things from them, and that makes you feel better, then you go see that medium. Okay? Just be cautious and take care of yourself. Okay. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. A little bit of a shorter episode and a little bit biased. So I fully admit I'm biased on this. I won't say I don't have feelings on this matter. So again, I won't say Elisabeth Kubler-Ross was the greatest mind of all grief and all things grief-related, but she at least took the time to listen to people and to care. And that in and of itself is wonderful. Okay, sorry, I'm going to shut up on the matter now. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely week. Please take care of yourself. And remember, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening today. It really helps the algorithm so more people can find me. But if you'd like to find me elsewhere, I'm at nikkithedeathdoula.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at Nikki the Death Doula. Please feel free to reach out to me there. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. As always, all the money I receive from my Patreon goes into a fund so that I can provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. And you'll also get access to bonus content and maybe even a shout out here on the podcast. Scripts, editing, sound design, production, literally everything is done by me, myself, just me. Except for the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find license information at filmmusic.io/standard-license. And as always, a special shout out to my best friend and husband for continuing to support me along the way.